I'm Andrea from Lemoore, California, and you're watching Gospel Tangents, your best source for Mormon history, science, and theology.
I'm Rick Bennett. In our last conversation with Dr. Margaret Toscano about her chapter in the Gospel Topics essay series, we talked about the strengths of the essay on women, temple, and priesthood. In this conversation, we're going to talk about some of the weaknesses in the essay, and I'll also ask Margaret about another author that we've had here on Gospel Tangents, Jonathan Stapley, in The Power of Godliness. He talks about some of the similar topics and has a different interpretation than Margaret does. So we'll talk about what she likes about Jonathan's book and some of the other things, whether she agrees or disagrees with him. So it'll be a fun conversation. You won't want to miss it. Check it out.
So do you want me to go now? What is my general critique?
Yeah.
So my general critique really centers around two things. That on the one hand, I feel like that they're not willing to look at all of the evidence. That they pick out evidence that supports their thesis. And because of that, and maybe I should state what their thesis is. Their thesis is they start out with this idea that people who look at the statements of Joseph Smith to the Relief Society of Nauvoo, they're going to be surprised by the priesthood language that Joseph uses in relationship to women. And so how do you reconcile that? So I say that the thesis of the church essay is that Smith's statements about women and priesthood do not mean what they seem to mean. That when he says that I'm going to make of you a kingdom of priests, he's not talking about priests in the sense of, like a priesthood office or something. That he's referring to the temple, and that the temple only refers to family units and temple sealings and kind of being sealed, men and women being sealed so that they can go to the celestial kingdom and become like God. So they say, well, that kingdom of priests only means kind of like kings and priests, queens and priestesses in the temple. But I would argue, what are kings and priests and queens and priestesses in the temple? Is that self-evident, right? And they seem to think it is. So they say, the other thing that they say is that Joseph Smith never ordained women to priesthood at all, and that the temple priesthood does not have any authoritative keys connected to it, and that the Relief Society was never intended to be a priesthood organization. And so, of course, he made that statement where he says two things. The Relief Society should be organized in the order of the priesthood, and Joseph Smith also said that the Relief Society should move according to the ancient priesthood. So they kind of say, well, those statements of Joseph Smith don't mean what you might think they mean at all. That really Joseph Smith's views on the priesthood and women and the temple are exactly the same as what leaders today believe and teach. So they say there's no difference between Joseph Smith's teachings and the current leaders' teachings at all. And so you don't need to look at that language at all. And so from my perspective, I say, well, is there any evidence from Joseph Smith from the Nauvoo period that can contradict their central thesis and argument? And obviously, I think there is. But so I see that as a weakness in the sense that, I don't know. I mean, again, I don't want to say that it's disingenuous. I think that it's just like, I think that the authors are convinced of their thesis, but the very fact that if you're convinced, why won't you look at contrary arguments? And that's where I have a problem with it. My other problem with the essay, and it's really interesting because they say that Joseph Smith's views on women in priesthood and the temple are exactly like leaders today. They then say, they frame the whole thing by saying that that there is this interdependent relationship of men and women in the church where women and men have equal roles and that women have a lot of opportunities in the church. And so I say, well, that's true. I mean, I think that, the women are essential to how the church runs. And there is, especially as time has gone on, I think women have more of a voice in the church. On the other hand, they really downplay the hierarchical nature of priesthood, not just for women, but for men. I mean, it is a hierarchy. They downplay that, and they don't acknowledge anything that somebody could say, well, what about this? And even the very fact that there have been some changes in the last 3 years, I think, show that, since the essay came out in 2013, obviously there were a lot of women who felt like there were things that were unequal that bothered them. I mean, one of those would be language in the temple, right? That there has been any of the language about women obeying their husbands, or, that sort of thing in the temple has been changed. Well, I think that really came in response to women feeling that there were elements of the temple that made them very uncomfortable. So for me, if I have my major critique is I do not feel like they acknowledge the problems or acknowledge documents or statement by Joseph Smith that really paint a different picture than what we have today.
Interesting. So a couple of things I want to just mention there. And I hate to bring up another book, but Jonathan Stapley wrote the book, The Power of Godliness. And it seems to me, and I think Matt mentioned, I think it was Jenny Reeder he thought had written this essay, or it might have been Lisa Olson Tate, I can't remember which. I don't know if those are who you were guessing on that, but he had mentioned that on John DeLynne's Mormon Stories podcast. But Jonathan Stapley has written the book, The Power of Godliness, and in it he talks a lot about women who gave blessings, and his thesis seems to be very similar with what the Gospel Topics essay says. And I know Jonathan created a term of cosmological priesthood, which I don't know, it sounds like he's not even sure he likes that word anymore. But at any rate, the idea was Jonathan had said that no woman felt like she had priesthood back in the 1800s. And so it's anachronistic to go back and apply priesthood terms. He also said the definition of priesthood has changed and that they conflated a lot of terms. And so it sounds like, so some readings may sound like they had priesthood, but they didn't have priesthood in the modern sense. So first question, have you read Jonathan's book, Power of Godliness? And what do you make of his arguments there?
So I have read Jonathan's book, and I actually added, since this essay was originally written before his 2018 book came out, I did add a big footnote about that. And I like a lot of what Jonathan does. I mean, I agree with his basic premise that what Joseph Smith, how he defined priesthood, is different than how we define it today. But that goes along with my argument that you can't say that Joseph Smith's views on priesthood itself, or even priesthood of women, are the same as the current church. I really believe that Joseph Smith saw priesthood at its heart as, in fact, the power of godliness. So I think before, when we talked, Rick, the way I have described priesthood, and I do this in several different essays, is that there is the spiritual aspect of priesthood, which is the power of godliness. And then there are the outward offices and organization and ordinances. And that for Joseph Smith, and I would say that for Joseph Smith, he sees the power of godliness as the center of priesthood. And I think that what Joseph Smith saw is that for him, and I know I have a statement here somehow in my essay, where for Joseph Smith, priesthood at its core was the power of godliness that makes you into the image of God and that brings you into God's presence. So that the purpose of the priesthood is basically transformation of both the individual and the community. And that the church priesthood, in a sense, is subordinate to that. That the church priesthood is to create an organization where you can give the ordinances to people, and the ordinances are a conduit for power that then help with that transformation. So I think one of the major contributions of Joseph Smith was that he was always trying to bring together the spiritual and the physical. And so Joseph Smith would have seen, well, the power of godliness, that's the center of priesthood. And then the ecclesiastical priesthood, its purpose is to facilitate the reception of the power of godliness, to make us into the image of God. And then I think that Joseph Smith, and here's where I actually critique Jonathan's book, like he likes that term cosmological, but that's not a Joseph Smith term. So I think it's kind of ironic that he thinks other people are anachronistic when that was not the term that Joseph Smith used. The term that Joseph Smith uses is the fullness of the Melchizedek priesthood. So he saw the fullness of the Melchizedek priesthood, or Joseph Smith also used the term messianic priesthood. Messianic priesthood, which we don't use in the church at all today, I think for Joseph Smith meant that you were being made into the image of Jesus Christ. So, I mean, I appreciate Jonathan's book. I think he does a lot of great things in there. But, and we can come back to this. I think there are some really important statements of women who were at the 1842 Nauvoo Relief Society speeches and who were endowed by Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, where I believe they saw themselves as having priesthood. And I have a couple of quotes I can give you. So I disagree with him on that. And in fact, the statements that they felt like that by having the fullness of the Melchizedek priesthood through their endowment, that gave them more power to give healing blessings. So I appreciate Jonathan's book. I think it's a really important book in this discussion. But I think that he does not really look fully at all of Joseph Smith's statements on the fullness of the priesthood and how that was connected to the temple and how central Joseph Smith saw that in terms of the sanctification and exaltation of human beings.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Margaret Toscano. In our next conversation, we'll talk about some statements by Bathsheba Smith and Eliza R. Snow on whether they felt that they used priesthood power when they laid their hands on and healed the sick.
It's interesting. The essay quotes Eliza Snow by saying, you can heal in the name of Jesus. Don't do it with the priesthood. But again, here's my critique of the essay. They don't mention that Eliza Snow said that to women who weren't endowed. And Joseph, actually, this is what he says in Nauvoo, that just by your baptism, you have the power to heal. And then he says to them, but I'm going to soon give you something more that will give you even more power and authority to heal and use the spiritual gifts. And that's what Bathsheba said. What Joseph gave us, he gave us all of these orders of the priesthood that give us this power to heal and to lay our hands on the sick. And so Eliza, she said you can heal the sick just with the power of Jesus, but if you're an endowed woman, you can use the Melchizedek priesthood.
For those of you who are interested in the entire interview uncut without any interruptions, sign up at patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview for just $5 a month. Also, we have other tiers. If you'd like to subscribe on our website at gospeltangents.com, click on the yellow subscribe button and you can subscribe for $10. You can also do that on Patreon and get a PDF transcript. We've also got some other ones for $15 and $20 if you'd like to get those as well. If you're interested in individual transcripts, go to Amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see our past interviews there in paperback form. So just check out Gospel Tangents. We're always updating those. For the latest updates on Facebook, go to facebook.com/gospeltangents, and you can see our latest updates there. We're also on Twitter at Gospel Tangents. Of course, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And please give us a 5-star rating for those of you who listen to audio only. So once again, thanks for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again.